Hey, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome Fraggers. Thanks for joining us today. We got a minute to share my slides. Okay. Okay, and then we're just waiting for Bari to come up on stage.
Vicky, it's not in full screen on my end.
Excellent. I got everyone.
It's not in full screen, Vicky, your presentation.
Okay, yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We have an excellent 2-day webinar lined up. So to introduce myself, my name is Vicky Simkovic. I'm the coordinator with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, and with me here today is Bari McFarland, Director of Science and Stewardship at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and Kyle Borrowman, Acting Director of the Habitat Restoration Program at NCC. And we have Emily Mitchell, who you'll see in the background, doing technical support. She's a Science Communications and Event Coordinator with the OIPC. So I think we can get started. And today's webinar is on developing a coordinated response to Phragmites management. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide you with the tools in developing a coordinated response to Phragmites management. So it's not as much focused on control methods as it is discussion about how to develop that collaborative approach and make new connections. So that collaboration will be an important theme over the next 2 days.
Sorry, Vicky, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your presentation isn't in full screen. We're still seeing like the slide deck on the side there.
Okay.
Yeah, so the button right there. Yeah, we still see it not advancing.
That's strange. Sorry about that. Okay, maybe I should unshare it and share it again.
Yeah, stop sharing your screen. Go to share, entire screen.
Try that. No, it still doesn't show.
Okay, do you want me to share mine?
Let me try the one more time.
Okay, and then I'll have it on my end. There we go. Yes, that's...
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that works now?
Yeah, you just try advancing a slide just to make sure.
See that?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so before we dive in, we wanted to know more about who's joining us today. So if you could write in the chat on the right-hand side, feel free to introduce yourself, your name, where are you from, why are you here? And also we're curious to know what the scale of the Phragmites program you're working on is. Is it sort of the large scale municipal level, or are you working with small populations? So let us know. And while you're introducing yourselves, I wanted to introduce the Green Collaborative. The Green Shovels is a group of like-minded conservation organizations that formed in early 2020 with a shared interest in protecting nature through advancing the management of invasive species in Ontario. These groups work together on a collection of projects that aim to address invasive species issues in the province, and most notably Phragmites. So members of the collaborative are here on the right, and here are their logos. So we have Ducks Unlimited, FOCA, Invasive Species Center, Nature Conservancy of Canada, Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. We also wanted to acknowledge the MNRF for funding the Green Shovels projects and making this webinar possible. So I'm just going to go over quickly the schedule over the next 2 days. So I'm going to begin with an introduction to Phragmites and management, and then we'll slide into Bari McFarland, who will start to discuss the first sections of the regional Plan Guidebook so you can get the most out of this resource. We'll then discuss how to establish a working group with Janice Gilbert from the OPWG, our guest speaker, and also Jacob Kloeze from the NCC will discuss Indigenous engagement. On the second day, Kyle Barman of the NCC will pick up where Bari left off with the Regional Plan Guidebook. And then Tom Cowan will discuss, from MECP, will discuss permits and authorization. And then Brett Norman will discuss implementation. And then as you see at the end, we have a Q&A at the end with our guest speakers and staff. So if you do have questions throughout these 2 days, just write them in the Q&A tab, and you'll see the Q&A tab is the third tab from your right, and that's just an easier way for us to keep track of questions and organize them, and people can upvote questions as well. So answer the question away, and we'll get to those questions at the end. And then at the end of the day, we'll have time for networking. So we're sort of hoping it's not just introducing the guidebook and learning more from our guest speakers, but also you'll have the opportunity to collaborate and network with people who are joining us today, and hopefully establish some new connections that can enhance your many of the great projects and work that all of you are currently involved in. So I'm going to begin with an introduction to Phragmites, but before I do, I wanted to acknowledge that we're gathered here today from across the traditional territories of Canada's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. I'd like to acknowledge the role of our Indigenous peoples as stewards of this land and thank them for their teachings. As well, after the webinar, we're going to be offering a final quiz on the content that was covered. So it's a great way to solidify your understanding of what was discussed. Those that complete the quiz will receive 70% or more will receive a final certificate of completion. And just to note that only those who attend this live training over the 2 days will be able to receive the final certificate. We'll also have a post-event survey, so you can let us know how you thought of these last 2 days, give us some feedback, and so Emily will be providing those links in the chat later on. So let's begin with an introduction to a plant that probably needs no introduction, but it's a perennial wetland grass that forms near monoculture stands in wet areas. In 2005, it was recognized as Canada's worst invasive plant by scientists at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada for its impacts on the environment, economy, and society. In terms of impacts on the environment, it spreads aggressively, reaching heights of more than 5 meters and densities of over 200 stems per meter square. These densities reduce habitat quality for SAR and other wildlife. The rigid and tough stalks make it difficult for wildlife to easily navigate through. So while wildlife can use the edges of Phragmites stands, is essentially the interior sections are dead zones. Phragmites also fills in shallow wetland habitat that aquatic species need for nesting, food supply, and shelter. And so all these changes to wetlands in turn leads to a loss of biodiversity. Phragmites has become a significant threat to Great Lakes coastal wetlands, threatening a high number of species at risk. There was a report from 2015 that estimated over 25% of Ontario species at risk are impacted by invasive Phragmites. In terms of impacts on the economy and society, Phragmites is also known to cause physical and structural damage to infrastructure. Here, this photo on the right shows Phragmites growing through concrete. It also can lead to delays and increased costs in construction, block roadways, lead to reduced property values, impact recreational activities like boating and tourism, clogs agricultural drains, which can lead to flooding and reduce crop yields. And then a recent economic study put together by Green Shovels found that the impacts of Phragmites left unmanaged can cost municipalities and agriculture millions in lost revenue each year. So this just stresses the importance of the need to manage Phragmites, and especially taking that early detection and rapid response approach when the costs of control are still manageable. In terms of distribution, it's native to Eurasia and now is found throughout the world. So here's a worldwide distribution map on iNaturalist. So you can see it's pretty much all over the world now. Rapid expansion in North America occurred in the early 1900s, and it was likely intentionally introduced as part of the horticulture trade and accidentally as seed contaminant in ballasts. Rapid expansion in Ontario occurred during the 1990s, and it's now widespread and present in most municipalities across Ontario. It's mainly concentrated in southern Ontario, as you can see from this iNaturalist map, but it's also found in northern Ontario. It's common along highway corridors and roadways, and they serve as important vectors of spread to new areas, particularly through the north. And in Northern Ontario, it's currently still mostly confined to urban centers, roadsides, and shorelines, but it does have the potential to spread into more remote habitats from there, and it can be very expensive and difficult to control. In terms of habitat, as I mentioned, it's mostly found in aquatic habitats, lands and stream banks and beaches, but its extensive root system that can reach up to 40 meters in length allows it to grow in semi-aquatic and terrestrial environments as well. And here I have just a picture of a book that I read to my daughter. I was kind of surprised to see what looks very much like Phragmites in the book. So just showing kind of Phragmites is everywhere. And once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it. So in terms of what it likes, it's quite salt tolerant, and that allows it to thrive along roadside ditches where many other plants can't. But it is sensitive to certain environments like dynamic aquatic environments where there's a lot of water level fluctuations. And then in terms of spread, it spreads mainly by rhizomes and above ground stolons that break off and fragment. They can also spread by seed heads, but seed viability is quite variable from year to year, and germination tends to be low unless the plants are growing in high nutrient sites. And just an important consideration for control is that the extensive underground root network that makes more than 80% of the species biomass. So that's an important consideration when developing a management plan. And then I just wanted to draw your attention to two OIPC documents, our Phragmites BMP and technical bulletins. So if you're looking for more information on how to control and set up a management plan in more detail, I strongly encourage you to take a look at these documents. There have recently been a few updates to the legislation and permitting requirements, herbicide application over water, and biological control. So if you're looking for more detail, again, I encourage you to go on our website to our best management practices tab, and it's there for you to download. And then in terms of the goals of management, overall, of course, is to prevent establishment in the first place, but once present, prevent continued spread and reduce or eradicate existing populations. And then there's taking a collaborative approach. So to successfully manage Phragmites, an integrated landscape scale implementation plan that includes all partners and stakeholders within a region is needed. And then there's minimizing unintended ecological effects. So consider how removal might impact the species that live in or around the Phragmites stands. So while the presence of frag can harm native species, the removal can also have a negative impact. So wildlife will often use the edges of Phragmites stands if there's no other quality habitat. So here's just some examples, like the least bittern will build nests in Phragmites stands, and spotted turtle breeds in wetlands invaded by Phragmites. So to avoid adverse impacts, mitigative action and planning is really important. So some examples include performing habitat assessments. It's always important to make sure you're surveying a site before you're beginning removal and considering what SAR might be at that site, and considering timing windows for species when their most sensitive periods are for nesting, breeding and spawning, and ideally avoiding those time periods for control. So this table is from our BMP, and it just shows different taxa and when they're most active in terms of nesting and spawning. And so that's an important guide for determining when might be best for your site in terms of control. And our BMP also has a handy table 10 in our BMP on going over in more detail, like what mitigative actions to consider at all stages of Phragmites control, from pre, during, and post control. So I encourage you to take a look. And of course, relevant legislation and expertise should always be consulted, and necessary permits acquired prior to starting work, especially in sensitive habitats. So if you're ever unsure about permits you might need or where to obtain them, ask your local conservation authority or M&R office. So just some examples of permits that might be needed for species at risk or for applying herbicides. And these are just some examples of management techniques you might consider when planning your Phragmites removal plan. So there's many factors to consider when deciding what the best option is. So it depends on site conditions, if you're going to be treating over dry land or water, the size of the population, management goal, what resources you have to be available. And usually techniques to be successful are combined with multiple methods in a multi-stage approach with ongoing yearly monitoring and control. So just on land, a couple examples. If you're in a sandy environment, spading is a great technique. A herbicide application or prescribed burning. In water, there's the cutting to drown technique for Phragmites that's in deeper water. So this effectively drowns the plant by inhibiting its supply of oxygen. So it's basically cutting beneath the water surface at a certain depth. And it's typically done like manually with a Raspberry King cutter or some kind of power equipment. And here are just examples of some herbicides that are used for controlling Phragmites over dry land and on water. And any herbicide application usually requires some letter of opinion from the MNRF or permits from the MECP. And then just some final advice. I'd encourage you to connect with others in your area, professionals, community groups. Don't be afraid to ask for help or advice if you need it. And select the least harmful control method that's the most ideal for your site, keeping effort, efficiency in mind, and species at risk and how wildlife might be using your site. And then dispose of Phragmites appropriately to prevent it from regrowing. So again, our BMP goes through some more detail into how to dispose of Phragmites appropriately, and revisit the site each year to monitor for regrowth. Usually ongoing monitoring and control is required. So with that, I would like to introduce Vari onto the stage and give a brief bio. Hi, Vari. So Vari McFarlane is the Director of Science and Stewardship for Ontario Region of the Nature Conservancy of Canada. She oversees stewardship of NCC properties throughout Ontario and landscape scale planning for property acquisition. She grew up in Scotland, holds an honors ecology degree from the University of Stirling, and a PhD in ecology from the University of Exeter in Cornwall. So take it away. I think I just...
Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Vicky. It's great to be here today. I just need to do a little bit of rearranging on my screen so I can see my slides and things, and then I will be ready to go. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. I will assume someone will stop me if you can't see my screen or if you can't hear me. Great, so thank you very much for the introduction, Vicky. And thanks to all of you that are here today to join us to learn a bit more about our suggested approaches to frag management. Just a quick addition to my introduction. I'm one of the authors on the Phragmites guidebook. The aim of this document was to kind of break down what we consider to be the most important components of a successful Phragmites management program into sort of logical bite-sized parts. Trying our best to share our own experiences in-house and those that partners and neighbours and friends have shared with us, so that ideally, so that you, everybody out there, can make a successful start on Phragmites management. The guidebook will be available very, very shortly online from the Green Shovels Collaborative website. We're working on some final edits, although of course the intent is that it will always be a work in progress and subject to input from ideally all of your collective real life experiences in managing Phragmites. So I just want to start off with a couple of fun anecdotes I've experienced with Phragmites. So as Vicky mentioned, I grew up in Scotland, and one of my last trips home, I went out to the Isle of Harris in northwest Scotland. We often like to think that Canada extends so far north that some invasive species might not survive. You know, the deep cold north will take care of these things. But at least in an Ontario context, that's probably pretty unlikely, unfortunately. Here I am here almost 58 degrees north in the Isle of Harris, Scotland. I had a look on iNaturalist about a year ago, and the most northerly observation I found of Phrag was about 65 degrees north in Finland. And for context, Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario was only around 48 degrees north. So Ontario obviously extends north of Thunder Bay, but it doesn't extend far enough north that we can assume that our cold Canadian winters will do very much to it. Another fun anecdote here, I had the privilege of spending some time in Namibia and Southern Africa a few years ago. We might like to think that here in Canada, we have plenty of big herbivorous mammals that might chomp away on Phrag, but here it is growing quite happily. It's the only green thing for miles and miles and miles after 5 consecutive years of drought and Namibian desert conditions. And it's surrounded by some of the biggest grazing mammals on the planet and doing just quite happily. And this really speaks to the point that Vicky made about how much of the biomass of the plant is actually underground rhizomes and root systems. Even if you've got elephants chomping away at the top, then it will quite happily keep sending up more leaves. So just some fun anecdotes to start with. So this is what the content section of the guidebook document is probably going to look like, something like this. And as you'll probably see, I'm afraid it is quite a long document. Sorry about that. We have tried to pepper some fragments of humor in here and there throughout it to keep it a bit of a light read. But the good news is that you don't actually have to read the whole thing cover to cover. It's maybe not the most exciting of bedtime readings. So the idea is that you can kind of dip in and out of the sections that are relevant to you as you work through building a Phragmites management program. So after kind of a brief overview and introduction, including some of the information that we've heard from Vicky already today, it's split into 3 main sections. So ideally, everybody embarking on a Phrag control program of some sort, no matter how small, should read all of the first section. That gives that kind of more detailed introduction to the problems that Phragmites can cause and some of the control techniques. Part 2 can be reviewed on more of an as-needed basis. Think about what sort of landscape is supporting Phragmites in your area and focus on those particular sections. There's obviously some overlap between different habitat types, different land types, so it doesn't hurt to review all of it, but don't get overwhelmed by it. Don't feel that you have to read every word right from the beginning. And the third section at the end is actually some example templates, which includes some sort of suggested wording for several important processes that you're very likely to have to engage with. So Vicky's already mentioned the need for permits and authorizations, public notification of some of your work, and are also some examples. So we've pulled together some examples of documents that we've used at the Nature Conservancy of Canada and more broadly, with a view to helping share some of our experiences and hopefully mean that you don't have to reinvent the wheel too much. And I guess I forgot to advance my slides. There you go. So the first section, and again, this has already been alluded to in the guidebook, is really emphasizing the need for collaboration. It really is a key theme that you will get sick of us mentioning throughout this webinar, and that will come up again and again in the guidebook. Managing Phragmites in a sort of piecemeal, scattershot way across the landscape, it happens, of course, and we understand why, but it is really not the best approach to a long-term sustainable management of the species. You can see in this photo that there's a really narrow strip along the edge of the road here that's been sprayed. It's been managed along the roadside, but it leaves this huge patch of completely unmanaged Phragmites on what's probably private land just beyond the roadside. And this means that the roadside strip will be reinvaded annually, rendering this treatment really quite ineffective, even just in the short term. It's of course completely understandable that this happens, but we'd really like to encourage and support people to get together and collaborate so that in situations like this, the entire patch can actually be effectively and sustainably managed. So our kind of motto here, I guess, is to do what you can to treat the patch, not just the edge, treat the whole population as best you can. And of course, this example can be magnified up depending on the scale of the landscape that you're looking at. If you're, say, one of the larger municipalities with quite a large landscape, then bear this concept in mind broadly across the landscape. So this is why the first step that we really recommend is to establish a working group. Even if you've already made a start on Phragmites management and have a bit of a group together, it's worth pausing just to see what individuals or groups might be missing from your table, your actual table or your electronic virtual table. And take stock of what sort of barriers you've already encountered with Phragmites management, what resources, tools, or expertise and experience you might need to make a more sustained or lasting progress. And this really could be as simple as, oh gosh, if only we knew someone with a boat that could help us access that patch way over there that I keep seeing and can't get to. Or maybe there's a utility line running through your area and you really wish that you could manage the Phragmites growing there in a more sustainable manner. And so having access to whomever it is that manages that utility line is really important here. So taking the example on the previous slide with the little roadside stretch that had been managed and the other patch that hadn't been, maybe you just can't work out who that private landowner is, but you'd really love to manage the frag in collaboration with them. So pulling together a working group would really help in finding out who owns what land, who you need to talk to get a much more coherent landscape scale project off the ground. And Phragmites management, it is unfortunately complex. It does require quite a lot of different arms, if you like, lots of tools in your toolkit, both literal and figuratively. It grows in a range of different habitat types. It requires lots of different tools to manage it. And there's a range of both biological and human social constraints to successful and sustained management. Having a variety of people around your real or virtual table really lightens the load that each has to carry, and it allows you to share expertise, resources, and results, and I guess more sort of joined up Phragmites management. It's quite likely you're going to need boats, trucks, herbicide, maybe even helicopters, and potentially even a marsh master, like in the bottom right photo here, as well as handheld tools, perhaps the ability to conduct a prescribed burn to burn off some of the biomass once you've killed it. A lot of different components here. So pulling people together from a variety of sectors will really increase the probability that you've access to this broad range of tools, experiences, licenses, insurance, all of the fun things that you need to kind of collate to have a decent chance at this. Of course, a key part at this stage in the process, as early on as possible, is also to identify rights holders. First Nations and Indigenous communities have constitutionally protected rights, and it's very important to understand these and think about what implications Phragmites management may have on these rights. And again, having a broad working group should help with making these kind of connections and learning. Indigenous right holders may not always have the time and resources available to sit on your working group, although of course this would be ideal. But your broad working group can hopefully support the how-tos of relationship building, and we'll hear a bit more about this later. So in summary, we really can't emphasize enough the importance of this first step of establishing a working group, collating people with a vested interest in Phragmites management and finding collaborative ways to work through the problem. And as I said, we'll keep revisiting this point throughout the workshop. As I mentioned already, as you form your working group, it's crucial to identify and include rights holders as early as possible. It's really important to remember this key point that, as I mentioned, that First Nations and Indigenous communities have constitutionally protected rights. And these rights may be impacted by both Phragmites itself. We've already heard a little bit about how it can outcompete native plants, which may have cultural importance. It might be supporting food resources, cultural resources that are really important to local communities. But of course, Phragmites management itself may also impact these constitutionally protected rights. So engaging as best you can with First Nations communities, groups, nations is really, really important very, very early on. Doing it early gives you a lot more time to learn about the local First Nations and communities in your area, so you can build meaningful relationships. And we'll hear a bit more about this later from a few of our guest speakers, in fact. Broadly speaking, we'll hear from Janice Gilbert from the Invasive Phragmites Control Centre with more details on establishing a working group shortly. And as I mentioned, from Jacob Kloeze from NCC, chatting a bit more about that important relationship building. So just a little bit more about this. I've been mentioning this a few times. It is incredibly important. Identifying rights holders very early on, and including these both actual perspectives, but also, of course, the legally binding rights very early is very important. It's worth keeping in mind at this point that there is a difference between consultation and engagement. So consultation in this context refers to the legal obligation of the Crown and refers to information sharing between the Crown and First Nations. And this may well be very important for your project. Here in this workshop and in the guidebook, we're expanding a little bit more on engagement, and we're using this term to describe the process of relationship building specifically. You should attach a lot of importance to this and keep working at it throughout the project. Keep revisiting your relationships with the whole community, including Indigenous members of that community, before, during, and after your project. Give it plenty of time and treat the process with respect. It should never be an afterthought. And that's something that, as a settler myself, I'm still learning hard, working at how best to kind of go about this part of the process, which we're appreciating and learning more and more about is very important. So really simple things like learning how to correctly pronounce the name of the community or key local landmarks that might be in an Indigenous language. These kind of things can go a long way, like with any relationship building. There's quite a few resources that we reference in the guidebook to help you start on your learning journey about First Nations and Indigenous communities. I'm sure you will come across many others on your journey, and we really, really encourage you to take the opportunity to learn, do what you can to become a trusted, valued entity in the community where you're working. As I mentioned, we'll hear from Jacob Kloeze shortly on some experiences with relationship building to help with stewardship delivery. And I forgot to advance my slides again. Sorry about that. So yeah, take the time to learn, build on your learnings, and don't be surprised to end up with some kind of dead ends, some false starts, some bits that you need to revisit and keep working at. And be thoughtful and courteous, and be very respectful of people's time and resources as well. Many Indigenous communities are having a lot of demands on their time. You're just one of many lining up to engage or to consult. So work out the best way that you can build those relationships meaningfully. So you're possibly thinking at this point, oh my goodness, this whole frag thing is going to cost a lot of money. And unfortunately, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But the good news is that because Phragmites impacts so many different sectors of society and so many important biological processes, as well as rare species and ecosystems, there's an increasing diversity of funding sources to support all of us dealing with it. It's becoming increasingly apparent as well that it's a lot more costly to not manage Phragmites because of the devastating impacts it's having on so many sectors. We heard a little bit from Vicky already about some direct economic costs, as well as human health and safety costs on top of these acute biological impacts. Blocking drainage, encroaching farmland, blocking sightlines along roads, removing access to water and wetland resources for both Indigenous cultural activities, such as things like food gathering, access for fishing, access for recreational activities. All of these things can be really quite seriously impacted, or in fact, frag can completely prevent some of these activities remarkably quickly. And we're already seeing that, especially in Southern Ontario. And we really want to avoid that situation transpiring in further north in the province where it's still less of a problem. You can learn a lot more about these costs and benefits by reviewing the cost-benefit analysis that's available on the Green Shovels Collaborative website. It gives you a little bit more information about some of these very real economic costs that we're all realizing, every day, and really hope to avoid by being a little more proactive moving forward with Phragmites management. So you're probably sick of hearing this, but once again, having that working group in place, it really is key. It will provide access to a diversity of actual funding sources, as well as diverse expertise, skill sets, and even potentially access to donors. So having a bunch of people around your real or virtual table, hopefully someone's got really good skills at writing grants or has heard about this potentially obscure funding source that you might be able to tap into for your project. It may also help sometimes, may help you realize some economies of scale and timing. So in some cases, Phragmites management can be rolled into some existing vegetation management processes, or may also open up creative funding sources. So for example, NGOs at the table might have access to donors who are concerned about Phragmites, while another example might be your local drainage superintendent might have some valuable insights into how drainage fees and things like that could be affected by, or could be used to offset Phragmites management costs. So again, having all these people around the table can really open up some new doors for Phragmites management funding. There's also increasingly some fairly Phragmites specific funding sources. Key one that obviously we want to highlight today is the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund. This so far, just this past year, has funded 21 collaborative community projects, just like what I hope every single one of you might be about to set up after this webinar. They've received funding during the current fiscal year, representing a $250,000 investment from the provincial government, for which obviously we're incredibly grateful for their funding and support to do all of this work. And keep an eye on the Green Shovels Collaborative website for future funding opportunities. We really hope that this is something that we can keep supporting. And if you hear about some perhaps obscure, unknown funding sources, then do let us know so we can share that with the broader Phrag management community as well. So now that you've got your working group established and ideally started some relationship building with local communities, including First Nations, hopefully you've got some funding sources underway. The next kind of step is to start encouraging some participation, more broadly speaking, in your project. And of course, this stage can also take a bunch of time, and of course builds on ideally really gentle, thoughtful, planned relationship building in the community. You can, again, draw on the strength of your working group to understand the community and any local idiosyncrasies that might be relevant to your project. Don't forget to use different ways to reach as broad an audience as you can. You can use a mixture of print media, radio, social media platforms, wherever else works in your area to get your message out. And of course, you'll want to kind of refine that message over time. Initially, you might simply want to raise awareness of the problem of Phragmites, the problem that everyone may encounter with it. But then shortly, you'll want to be a bit more targeted so you can reach potentially specific landowners, specific land managers that may have Phragmites on their properties that you'd like to engage in the process of managing it. It's worth, of course, paying attention to local customs. Think really hard about the best ways to build relationships that you need to lead to a really collaborative and sustained Phragmites management. It's not just a quick flash in the pan. Phragmites management does require a good 2, 3, 5, potentially plus years of sustained effort to make it actually effective. So you do need to be able to commit to being in this for the relatively long haul in terms of those relationships that you need to build. The next stage is to think about landowner participation. So when you're ready, you'll need to encourage key landowners to participate in Phragmites management. By this stage, and I know we haven't talked about it here, that probably warrants a whole webinar in itself, but you'll want to have some initial mapping of where Phragmites occurs in your landscape so that you can be really strategic about where to initiate management. If you happen to be a landowner yourself, or you're part of an organization who is, and you happen to find some Phragmites on your own land, then it's a really great place to start. Start at home and begin learning the ropes of frag management on your own turf. And of course, these opportunities should become apparent via your working group. The more people you have around that working group table, the more opportunities that you'll probably discover to do some at home, if you like, Phragmites management. From here, you'll build a good idea of other landowners you'd love to get engaged and have participate in the project, either by encouraging them to manage Phragmites themselves, or by providing support for them to do so on their own land. And again, taking this process slowly and carefully is really important. It's time consuming to build proper trust and relationships, but incredibly quick and easy to lose that. And once you've lost it, you can potentially have it lost for decades. So it's really important to, again, take the time and be thoughtful about engaging with people and encouraging and supporting that participation in your project. So that's a bit of an overview of some of the first few sections of the guidebook. Now we are really lucky to have Janice Gilbert from the Invasive Phragmites Control Centre join us with some real life on the ground experiences on implementation of some of these ideas. As you may have gathered by now, I don't get out very much anymore, so we are really excited to have the opportunity to, I've just lost my screen, where have we gone? There we go. Have some real life experiences from people that can really bring some of this stuff to life and share some of their experiences with doing this work. So I've known Janice for quite a few years now through my work at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I always appreciate her presentations. She's a wetland ecologist with a PhD from Ohio State University, with over 27 years of experience researching and assessing these valuable ecosystems. And I just realized that's on my wrong screen. Hang on. There we go. She began investigating invasive Phragmites' impacts on wetlands and appropriate control methods back in 2007. And since that time, she's been a lead author on over 150 reports and presentations, and is a contributor on a number of guiding documents that many of us use today. She's a founder and co-chair of the Ontario Phragmites Working Group and an advisor on 2 binational programs, the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative and the Phragmites Adaptive Management Framework, which are both operated under the US Geological Service and supported by the Great Lakes Commission. Janice is currently the executive director of the Invasive Phragmites Control Centre, a not-for-profit entity she founded to provide effective and environmentally responsible management of Canada's worst invasive plant. So I'm excited to have Janice join us. Thank you.
We are running early. We're running almost about 15 minutes early. So I'm not sure if Janice is able to come up now, or if we just want to kind of if Janice is ready to go now, or if we want to wait until 2. I think Janice is here and ready to go. So we're going to turn things over to you, Janice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And don't abandon me just yet, Emily. I need to share my screen. And this always happens to me when we do it practice. It's perfect. And then, okay, what do I need to push here?
Okay, so right next to the camera icon, you'll see there's a share button. Okay, you'll click on that. Then the option at the top says entire screen. If not, we'll try the tab. Okay, let's see.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go to
full screen.
Yeah. How's
Perfect.
that?
Yep.
Thank you.
You're good. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much, Vari and Carl, for inviting me to your event today to speak. They had asked if I would talk about these working groups a little bit more personally, and I have had the absolute pleasure to work with a number of local community groups over the years, and so hope to just shed a little bit of light on what a few of them are doing, and unfortunately I can't provide information about all of them, so there's no slight to you if I don't mention you today, honestly. And I'm actually wearing two hats, one with a co-chair of the Ontario Phragmites Working Group, which was mentioned, along with Gabby Nichols. She's my co-chair. She's with the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. And the other hat I wear is with my entity that actually helps to get things done before I got off the landscape of the Invasive Phragmites Control Center. But I was told, reminded many years ago about this African proverb, and it is so true. When it comes to frag, I have a tendency to want to go real fast and just go get her done. And what I've learned over the years is we can achieve so much more by working together and going at it in a thoughtful way. And with anything, I like to know, okay, what's the definition? Actually, grab the Wikipedia definition of the working group. It's a group of experts. This is their definition: working together to achieve specified goals. And the experts, from my perspective, when it comes to these community groups, you don't have to be an expert in Phragmites or frag control when you're first getting started. You could be an expert in communication and networking, or you could be good at fixing things, like be very handy, physically active. And that's the beauty of the working group, as Vari had mentioned, is if you can get together with other people of other skill sets, you'll have a really good, strong working group, and together you'll learn more about Phragmites. But the big thing with the working group is you're very focused. You have an objective in mind and what you need or want to do. And so the working group brings structure and clarity on your goal. And the first thing I just want to, for those of you that aren't aware, we do have an Ontario working group. And it developed from just a small group of us that had really similar needs and wanting to help get rid of Phragmites in the province. And so we started, there was a number of people I knew, and sat down, and we were actually at the Huron-Kinloss offices, and Mike Fair hosted us. He bought us lunch, and we just talked about, what our vision was for the province with Phragmites, and wrote it all down, and came up with a number of reasons why we needed to do this. What was our mission? We wanted to actually get management underway in the province. And why did we want to do this? What were our objectives? There was impacts on diversity and species risk and public safety issues, and there's impacts on landowner investment properties and recreation and tourism. So there's a host of reasons why we saw a need to do this. And okay, what do we want to do? What's our strategy? First on the list was education. We needed to educate people about Phragmites. Back in those days, hardly anybody knew about Phragmites at all. And so it was just getting the word out. And then we actually I wanted actually get some management going on the landscape. And I thought that this group was the group to get that going. And then get some funding and promote these projects and get expert advice, resources available to everyone, and advocate for the tools we didn't have, one of which was aquatic safe herbicide, which we now have, fortunately, and regulatory support. So our first name was the Phragmites Management Working Group, and that quickly on our second meeting got shifted. And it got shifted for a couple of reasons. Our second meeting was hosted by Crystal Lafranc and Tom Cowan from Ministry of Environment at their offices in London. And they said, Janice, we can't undertake frag control. We can only help guide it. And our scope changed to the whole province. And that's where the Ontario Phragmites Working Group name came from. And so our mandate changed. Our mandate changed to be promoting this work in a responsible way, assisting with getting the information spread out, and advocating for the tools that we needed to get the job done. And we actually were kind of a little bit orphaned there for a few years. And then fortunately, Owen Williams with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council came knocking and said, why don't you come under our umbrella? And that helped us immensely because it gave us administrative help. A website was created. We even had a logo developed. We then got assistance with meetings that we had in person every year. And then it helped our group to collaborate on a number of documents that have come out of since that time. These here, some of these were already mentioned. With the advocacy, that was a big part of our group in the early days because, again, we didn't have a lot of support from the provincial government or the federal government in terms of trying to forward initiatives. And the big initiative was support for Habitat Aqua, an aquatic safe herbicide, which was really key for us to move the chains on control. But another piece of this was the public education and awareness. And this is something I still get frustrated. We don't have like the Purple Loosestrife campaign. Or they're like, I drove through this. I don't want to point them out, but Shakespeare, they had these flags on their posts, and there's frag. So, they're obviously not aware that it's a problematic plant. Our first meetings were small, and then they got bigger. In fact, one was held by Rebecca Rooney, hosted at the University of Waterloo. We actually had to change the room because there wasn't enough space for all of us there. And since 2020, we've had over 100 in attendance every year at these meetings, and they've been held virtually because of COVID, but we're talking about having more of a in-person again or alternating. But you can see from this list, this was at our 2022 meeting, there's a lot of engagement now, interest. So we've come a long way since those early days, and hope to just keep building. And the main strength of this entity now is information sharing. We share the new information that's come out from research and what's going on in the province in terms of support, and a lot of new initiatives coming through such as the Green Shovels initiative. So there's a lot. That's the main focus now for our group, which is wonderful. Why I was invited to speak to you today really is, just give you a sense of some work that's going on that you may not be aware of from groups such as yours that you maybe belong to or you want to get established. And I'm just focusing on 5 groups, actually, 2 from Lambton Shores area, 1 from Kincardine, 1 from Oliphant, and 1 from Manitoulin. And they're all different sizes. And I just want to highlight just a snippet of what they've been doing. But I'm going to start with the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group. I think they're the longest standing group in the province. And you see they don't have working group in their name, but they definitely are a working group. And they're just retired individuals, all different backgrounds, what they used to be involved with in teachers or in businesses, and they all come with a variety of skill sets. They are all now experts in Phragmites, but they weren't when they first got started. And how they got started was very simple. In the community of Port Franks, there's a beach, and Nancy Vidler, who lives in that community, saw this plant, and she actually had Jeff Peach from the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation. He was the founder of that entity. He's since passed away, but he was with her on shore just talking about erosion issues, and he pointed to the plant. He said, "Do you know what that is?" She had no clue. She got herself educated. She started coming to some meetings that I was involved with and getting a program together for her beach. And that's how her group got started. She had like-minded individuals in her community that wanted to get it off the beach. And she had these like-minded individuals, and they were looking around and said, well, it's not only on the beach, but it's on the Asaba River that flows and empties, into the Lake Huron close to our beach. It's all along the roads in our community. It's along other sections of shoreline all throughout Lambton Shores. And so they formed this group, and they said, okay, these are the boundaries for our group, the municipality of Lambton Shores, which included 2 conservation authorities because there's 2 different watersheds in that community. And they went to council, and they educated council about Phragmites. And in fact, I can actually remember I was invited to Nancy's house, sitting at the kitchen table with her. She invited Kate Monk from Asaba Bayfield Conservation Authority, who didn't know about Phragmites, and so had a good chat about the plant, and that's got that entity engaged, that conversation in a big way. But it just started just grassroots slowly. But a management plan was supported, and it was created for the whole municipality. And it's actually since been updated. And Nancy and her group have been really active. They've done a number of delegations to the municipal council every year asking for some support for funding to do initiatives. They've sent numerous letters to the provincial and federal government advocating for Phragmites initiatives. They've met with their MPPs and MPs, the federal, provincial government, many times to talk about the issues. They've initiated conversations with the golf course industry and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. The International Joint Commission were invited to attend a meeting they were hosting to talk about Phragmites. And then also a number of meetings with the provincial government and a host of others. In fact, you can see her license plate, Frag Lady. She became well known in a number of circles, and her group has helped so many other groups as well, just sharing information. When Nancy was traveling through her community one day, she saw wind turbine construction going up. She followed them in, and she talked to them about Phragmites. They had no clue. She said, the construction work you're doing is going to be spreading this plant around. And so she helped them build a protocol to control it on all of their sites post establishment of these turbines. There's so much more that their entities have done, but you can see the list of partners that they've engaged, they pulled in over the years to help get some work done. They undertook an educational event to help the construction industry and the roadside control learn more about Phragmites. And in fact, they actually had someone attend in person from Hydro-Quebec. So this was back in 2017. I shared with them information I got from the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative. Someone from one of the states, I can't remember which, told me about these door knocker that they had done. So Nancy's group took that and ran with it. They went to the St. Clair Conservation Authority and ABCA Conservation Authority and said, look, if we find frag on private lands, would you be able to come and control it? And they said, absolutely. So they put that right on these door knockers. And so you're seeing the front and the back of the door knocker. And when they're out in the community and they see frag on private land, they would just put this on the door if the homeowners weren't there. But they can basically contact either CA to come, whatever watershed they're in, to come and do the work at a nominal fee. They also are very, very interested in the assessment piece. So what's not only happening with frag control management in their area, their community, but how are the systems responding to this and the wildlife that are in these wetlands and riparian areas. So they partnered with Bird Studies Canada to have this marsh monitoring program brought into their community to help get the community engaged in monitoring in these areas where Phragmites is being controlled. And in a lot of their funding proposals, they always put in the monitoring piece, particularly for one of the big projects, the Wood Drive Coastal Wetland, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So here's a map just showing some of the areas where they have specifically helped undertake control in Grand Bend, in Port Franks, in Ipperwash, and in Wood Drive, which I'm going to talk a bit about. But the biggest project, this is the biggest feather in their cap, is the Wood Drive Coastal Wetland. It basically was an orphan coastal wetland. It's in the riparian, the only one on Lake Huron in the riparian zone. It's adjacent to Kettle Point First Nation, who they have collaborated with a lot of engagement there with the First Nation community. But basically, nobody was looking after this wetland. And so they took it upon themselves to initiate control there. And then they went further down to Lambton Center, which is a church camp who also had issues with Phragmites on their shoreline, which was adjacent to the coastal wetland. And then private landowners who are also looking to restore and protect the land. And this is basically what the shoreline looked all along that whole section. Just terrible infestation. And so I started working with Nancy, with a crew from Kettle Point, and with my crew manually control it. And then we thought, we'll get clever and we'll build this barge with these weed sickles and go out and deal with it. And they invited Monty McNaughton, their MPP at the time, to come out in the inaugural launch of our little frag cutting machine. And out we went. But it only worked a little bit in intermediate density frag, not the high density. And during this time, I was getting my entity, the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, up and running. And with that, key pieces of equipment were these truxers from Sweden. That was a game changer for us. So these machines can deal with the big thick frag out there. And then Nancy's group would have the work with the stewardship rangers from the conservation authorities, and they would come out and help do manual fine tuning after the trucksters were done. And basically, we were able to, using this format, this approach, help restore this whole shoreline. And we did it in a very thoughtful way. And I want to point this out, that we left a fringe of thick frag out at the lake so that the native plants could recover, restore to intercept the wave activity. And so basically, if you were to go back to that system now, you wouldn't see any high density left. This is the church camp I mentioned. They actually put in a pool because they couldn't access the lake. So the same kind of collaborative working together approach. And this actually brought tears to our eyes, the first time in over a decade that the campers could actually access the lake. The camp facility was perfect for hosting events, and this particular one was really a celebration of the restoration work that had taken place. The mayor came. Monty McNaughton wasn't able to come, but his representative, John Fraser, was there. We had a group from Long Point come up that day because the Long Point, the emergency use program was going on down there, which Nancy had gone to talk to their groups about what was going on Lambton Shores. And so, yeah, it was just a really good day. But also used the facilities to have Ontario Nature come and host one of their events and educate that, talk about Phragmites work. So really important engagement work. One member of this group is Sandra Marshall, and she lives in a smaller community in Lambton Shores called Ipperwash. And so she founded a smaller group under the umbrella called the Ipperwash Frag Fighters. And basically their focus was the shoreline along the beach. And so she set up a webpage. She's a retired teacher, so she has really excellent communication skills. And a key piece of their program as well is education, local education. And on the website, you can see, who they are. She met with their neighbors. She talked to them about the Phragmites and came together and just formed this small group. And so they identified where the Phragmites was. They communicate how best to control it amongst their members and also to residents that come just for recreational purposes. And just a very successful program. And what they would do is they'd set up a booth right at the entrance so they get people coming to enjoy the beach for the day. They teach them about frag. They tag the baby frag so that people could see what they identify them, and then they taught people to spade or cane cut, and off they went. So their whole shoreline got controlled. It was that early detection rapid response program at its finest. But then they looked across the road where there's these dunes and swales, and it was just socked in with Phragmites, so they start the program there, getting more of the community involved, particularly those homeowners that backed onto these swales, and getting some funding to help clean up that area. And then with that, they approached the municipality and said, we have all this frag, can you help us? And they came free of charge, picked it all up. Sandra was able to go to local businesses and get free bags to put the frag cuttings in. And then Travels funding, they were able to put up some signs to educate, again, people coming to the community about their projects and where to get information. And what I absolutely love about this group was it didn't just stop. Once they got the frag off their beach, they noticed there's spotted knapweed and there's white sweet clover. So the same group, the same communication structure that was set up for Phragmites was used to help educate people about these other invasive plants. And the communication as well was set up on their Facebook. And Sandra would say, I'm going to go work at this street or along this area, this section of the beach. Whoever wants to come join me, such a time. And again, the municipality took away these problematic plants for them. And actually, I read in this one posting where they actually emptied the bags and brought the empty bags back to her. So talk about a really nice working group in the community under the umbrella of a bigger project going on. The next place I want to go to is Kincardine. This is a real group as well. And they started with 3 ladies that live along the shoreline of Kincardine. Municipality Kincardine has a bigger program going throughout the municipality. But in this section of the shoreline, these ladies took this on. And so because there was a bigger program going on, they were easily able to tap in to the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority and my group to help with the bigger stuff, but also the municipality itself. And that was key for them. The support was key because the municipality covered liability. So what that allowed these ladies to do was to go to the local school, because one of these ladies was a retired teacher, and get the students at volunteer hours to come out and help deal with the Phragmites. This was spading and cutting in the water. And then they were also able to hire local Mennonite ladies in the summer to use the still cutters and help cut it out of the water at these bigger areas. So that helped with the liability because they were such a small group. And then to pay these folks, they work through the Conservation Authority. Again, a really nice partnership, much smaller scale working group. But what action they got, several kilometers, and then joining other cottage groups along the shoreline. They have a large section all cleaned up, just starting small. Next place I want to go to is up in Oliphant, and this project was started by Leslie Wood. She's a retired veterinarian from the Ottawa region, and she has a cottage up in this area, third or fourth generation now. So she knows a lot of people, a lot of the local community, and just an amazing communicator as well. She was working on Phragmites out on her family islands. And then when she realized the extent of it throughout the whole community, because they used to access their island from a different location. This is like what she saw. It was just horrendous amount of Phragmites everywhere. So she got active real fast, and she started talking with her local other cottagers, the groups in the area that were working, and pulling together an amazing working group, an amazing community group. But she's the catalyst. She's the one that makes it to work. She was able to secure some funding. She had this raft built, and she has a little Canadian flag, and that's how you would find her out in the area during the day. And she posts and she say, "Okay, come on out to Rabbit Island 1:00," and just like out of the woodwork, all these boats, kayaks, and motorboats would arrive, and all these people would hop off, and away they go, and they'd start cutting and schlepping, as they call, picking up the frag and getting it out of the water. It was just phenomenal to see. So her group worked on the smaller areas, and my entity with the trucksters came in and dealt with the bigger areas. And this was a period when Lake Huron water levels were really deep, so we could use a lot of the cutting to drown methods. Our bottleneck for the biomass was like, how do we get it back to shore? It was we could cut, but we had to deal with the biomass. So she contacted a friend of hers, Paul McKenzie, who was actually at the time on the local council, the town of South Bruce. He has this barge. He had a young son who could activate this little mini excavator, which one of the cottagers had a business that donated this. And every morning, Leslie would meet with everybody and say, "Okay, I think we should go over here. The wind direction is right to contain it." And she would be our director of where we were working for the day. And so Paul would move the barge and set it up, and away we go. And she managed to get the buy-in from so many of the cottagers. This one here, in particular, owned a very fast barge, and just loaded up, and away we went. She did delegations to town council, and they, as in-kind support, provided an excavator and dump trucks, and they sat on the shore day after day after day unloading the biomass. And it all went to the local dump, and the guys at the dump took care of this. I went to look at it the next year, and it was gone. It was all buried with their garbage. The other thing that Leslie was able to do with the help of her was go to town council and get support for this bin, which they provided as in-kind support as well. And so when they're out there cutting the frag, they can bring the biomass into shore, put it in the bin, and the municipality looked after disposal free of cost. So kind of went from this disaster to this disaster. But there was still a large amount of frag that needed to be controlled, and cutting to drown wasn't working. So in came an amazing group from Nature Conservancy of Canada with some funding. But not only that, the ability to help forward a program using herbicides, the Habitat Aqua and a dryland application. And that was huge, because that takes a lot of legwork to get the community educated about the herbicide, lots of outreach and engagement, and they tapped into Leslie's network, and that was vital. So the information went out to all of the community. There was outreach events held. The First Nations communities were engaged in and were brought in as active partners, as was all of the other partners that had been engaged from the get-go. And so this last year was the second year. You can see the scale of this. So a lot of cutting ground happening. There's dryland herbicide application, and there was a wet herbicide, the Habitat Aqua. Leslie was instrumental in helping that program go so smoothly. She would send out information to her broad network and say, okay, they're going to be working in Rabbit Bay tomorrow morning. She'd be texting me and saying, okay, the winds are from the southwest. This is where you should be working, blah, blah, blah. And away we go. And she kept the communication channels open to everybody. And it was just a really amazing experience. And I'm just so grateful to Nature Conservancy, because that was really a game changer in terms of getting the Phragmites under control. And I think when we go back this year, we're not going to see any high density left. Just fantastic. Next project is Manitoulin Island. And I want to take you there because this lady, Judith Jones, has a whole island project going. She established this. And she's a botanist. She saw the threat that Phragmites was having to some very rare plants, some very rare communities on the island. She got herself educated. I went up and met with her. We went to some meetings that she had arranged with some of the municipalities and the First Nations communities, and she got a program together. She reached out to Nature Conservancy for some funding support and also some other entities. And she's built just an amazing program with a lot of partners, which I'll show you in a minute. But a part of her program was education. She had radio ads and newspaper articles. She established a Frag Watchers program. All the areas she helped get people to help map where the frag was on the island, and would host an annual event in July where all volunteers would come out and help work on the Phragmites. And basically, she's helping the shorelines look from like this to this. And one of the things that she was able to do was in some of these areas, again, it's some sites that you can't leave the biomass. She had the township free of charge, in kind, would help get rid of the biomass and take it away. So she's been working in a lot of communities with local cottagers and residences and areas, and also First Nations. And every year she provides a report, and she sends this out. Everyone that's been involved in the Phragmites project that year, and others that are just interested in highlighting the work that's been done. And you can see from her 2023 work, there's a lot of sites that have been worked on. She was actually able to secure some funds to have a crew, and they would go and do work all through the field season, as well as working with cottage associations. But so here's all the partners that she was able to engage. You can see, and one of the things I really loved about this was she recognized that a lot of the spread was happening through ATV activities. So she went to local businesses that were selling ATVs and helped develop this information poster. So working collaboratively with them. And then last year, she actually also developed a YouTube a video for folks to get educated about stopping the spread. And why this is so critical now is because when lake levels are low in Lake Huron, a lot more of this activity unfortunately happens in these really sensitive areas, and the spread of frag has happened. So she's trying to get the information out. And so she has a lot of programs that she's helped with the support of all those partners. And so the clean equipment protocol with the boats, Facebook page where to go for more information. If you have frag on your own property, you can contact them and they'll help them get rid of it. Where to report. As I mentioned, they have a Manitoulin Phragmites work week where they have sites that they go and volunteers come help. And she suggests hiring summer students, and they'll actually train them to do the work. So that's just, a snapshot of some groups that are working out there, what they've been able to accomplish. And I've not even scratched the surface of it. Those people are all available. Those groups are all available to share information with you, as are many others. There are so many other groups out there doing amazing work. One commonality that I've found with these groups, there's this one person, this catalyst that has got this group going, and they have common traits. They're very positive on a team-oriented approach. They build a really collaborative group around them, and they bring people that have different skill sets to help support them. They are all supported by their local governments, like their local municipalities, the local towns. That was key for them to do a lot of the initiatives that they did, and the partners that they've engaged to help with their initiatives was also very key. So the partners play different roles. They could bring funding. They could actually help with the control. They provide in-kind support, information. There's so many different roles that partners can provide that Vari had mentioned earlier. And one big thing is the education component. Actually, all of them have websites. They are really, really big on educating. They talk to everybody that will listen to them about Phragmites, going on door to door knocking. It's the one-to-one communication piece that is essential for a lot of this to work. But it's not just that. It's also the other ways of getting a lot of information out via Facebook or website, which you can check. So if you're thinking about, getting a group going wherever you are, these are these things that I thought you might want to think about. Why is the Phragmites an issue for you? Is it on your property? Is it around a pond that you own? Is it along a popular area you like to hike and you're seeing the impacts? So where is it? Why is it an issue for you? Is it an issue for others, that your neighbors in your community, maybe other groups that might be working on it in your, like conservation authorities or other entities? What's your goal? Is it just to get off your property? Is it get off your lake, off of your whole community, your whole municipality? And then how do you approach this goal? So that basically means, like, what are the stepping stones you need to take to achieve what you want to achieve? And the first one is the networking, the communication, the talking, and collecting as much information as you can, and actually leaning on these other groups that have a lot that they can share with you. And basically, what's your focus? Is it very small, or is it quite large? And I want to mention the Ontario Phragmites were starting these Fraggers Forum events where they're just very casual conversations that anyone can join in. And the first one is actually three of these folks that I mentioned today: Nancy Viller, Leslie Wood, and Sandra Marshall. I didn't mention Mary Lee Konderuk, who has a program going up in Sundridge, but this is the first event where these ladies are just going to talk about how they got their group started and share information, and it's meant to be casual, a conversation back and forth if you have questions. So this is going to happen at the end of April, and I think that an hour isn't going to do it, so we may have to have an encore. But there are other groups as well. I'm thinking of the Greater Toronto area and some other groups where there's a different roadblocks you may have had to jump over, or constraints that you may not have in maybe some of the more rural areas. But the key thing, I think, and maybe you're attending this session for a reason. You are interested, and you just get started, start small, and you just build on, and that's kind of how she goes from my experience.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Janice. That was awesome. It's always so incredibly heartening to hear about all of these, grassroots success stories where it's been one or two people that have taken on what's really a Herculean task, but actually pulled that off incredibly successfully and leading to these amazingly positive impacts for local communities and wildlife and all of the things. So thanks so much for sharing your experiences and perspectives with us, and we look forward to having you join us for the Q&A after the next speaker. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, Jacob Kloeze. He's the coordinator for conservation biology on the Soggy and Bruce Peninsula, and I'm really grateful to be able to call him a colleague here at NCC. He's been with us at Nature Conservancy of Canada for several years now, and he's led landscape scale invasive species control programs across the Soggy and Bruce Peninsula. And this collaborative effort is focused on the control of high priority invasive species, including Phragmites, but also a few other bits and pieces on both publicly and privately owned and managed lands. Prior to joining NCC, Jacob held various roles at conservation authorities in Ontario, including in environmental planning, low impact development, and ecosystem restoration. So welcome, Jacob, and we're excited to hear from you with your experiences on the Soggy and Bruce Peninsula.
Thanks, Barry. And let's see if I can do this correctly too. Okay, do you see my note side or the presentation side?
We see your notes slides.
All right, 1 second here. Still the same?
You're not sharing at all right now.
Emily's probably pulling her hair out because she walked me through this earlier.
It's okay.
There's a tricky extra step to be more, I think.
Yes, I'll just have you share again there, Jacob. So
Yep.
entire screen.
All right.
Okay.
There we go.
I'll have you put it in full screen. Okay, now at the top there where it says display settings, you're just going to flip your display. There we go. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, there we go. So yeah, thanks, Barry, for the introduction. As Barry mentioned, my name is Jacob Kloeze. I'm a coordinator with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I'm here to talk a little bit about our invasive species program, more specifically about Phragmites control, and again, more specifically talking about kind of the Indigenous engagement aspect of our program itself. So before going into that portion of it, just giving a kind of a very brief overview in terms of our program itself. So simply put, NCC is a land conservation organization who I work for, the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And our main focus is largely on land securement and stewardship. And as part of these stewardship efforts, we control invasive species. And typically this work has been done on a property by property basis. And as has kind of been described throughout this afternoon already, you know, we have the understanding, obviously, that this is only a small piece of the puzzle when it comes to protecting the ecological health of the areas in which we work, of which the Soggy Peninsula is one. So with that in mind, we really wanted to move towards a broader landscape scale approach to invasive species control and more specifically Phragmites control. So this led to the initiation of the Soggy Peninsula Invasive Species Collaborative in 2020. And we took a multi-species approach, high priority species, but really a strong focus on invasive Phragmites. And we certainly wanted to take a collaborative effort through this approach. So we've worked with a range of organizations, including lower and upper tier municipalities, provincial and federal level governments, more specifically Ontario Parks and Parks Canada, other land conservation organizations like the Bruce Trail, Escarpment Biosphere Conservancy, community groups, private landowners, and of course, First Nations communities. And through this collaborative approach, we've really been able to achieve that landscape scale control. And since 2020, we've been able to control well over 200 hectares of Phragmites throughout our project area. So on this slide, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the lands on which we work. The map displayed on the screen now shows the Soggy and Ojibwe territory. And I'm personally calling from Owen Sound today, which is kind of at the base of the peninsula. And as you can see by the map, our project area falls fully within the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation territory. So I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that, where I both personally live and work as part of this program are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg Nation, the people of the Three Fires known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And this includes the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation, located at Niashingamin on the kind of midpoint of the peninsula on the east side or Georgian Bay side, as well as the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation, with reserve lands located both at Chiefs Point and Saugeen First Nation, kind of at the base of the peninsula on the west or the Lake Huron side. And these two nations are known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation and are the traditional keepers of this land. I also wanted to touch just briefly on the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environment Office, as it's certainly been fairly instrumental in our engagement and collaboration efforts through this program. Briefly put, the mission of the Environment Office is to provide infrastructure and expertise for matters that affect the interests of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and assisting the chiefs and councils of San in asserting First Nation jurisdiction throughout the San territory. And they deal with a number of issues, and that includes things like nuclear issues, quarries, and obviously more specifically to our program, issues that impact San land and water. So moving on, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about engagement efforts and relationship building that we've gone through our program. And before I kind of get into this, I did want to say, this program has been really my first opportunity to engage with First Nations communities in kind of that professional setting and in a meaningful way. And I'm certainly no expert in this area, and really wanted to reiterate what Vari had kind of said, and what the guidebook says, and our experiences, communication really being more person to person. It's largely about sharing and learning, forming relationships and a familiarity, and that takes time certainly. And in a lot of ways, it's no different than relationships and engagement that we do with other partner organizations. So with that said, we've worked collaboratively with both nations for a number of years on stewardship projects across the Saugeen Peninsula. And this engagement work certainly predates our invasive species program. Some of the examples of this stewardship work include species at risk mapping, invasive species mapping and control work, and community engagement opportunities and youth presentations. And then talking more specifically about kind of the engagement that we've done through our Phragmites program itself, we, as I mentioned off the top, we really wanted to take a collaborative approach, and this certainly included engaging with First Nations communities through this Phragmites control program. And as a first step, we wanted to, when we initiated the program, our first step was to submit a formal briefing note to Joint Chief and Councils regarding our invasive species control program, providing an overview of the program, our goals and intentions, what we're looking to accomplish through it, and indicating our interest in completing work on reserve lands. That includes both, survey and control work. And through submitting this, we were successful in receiving permission to complete work on reserve lands, which has obviously been huge when you think about that kind of landscape scale approach. And then another kind of more formal aspect that we've gone through is, and Janice mentioned it, but the introduction of Habitat Aqua, which was registered for use in Canada in 2021. And we certainly identified that as a tool that we were interested in using through our program. And like any organization or landowner that we collaborate with, we wanted to make sure our Indigenous partners were comfortable with the use of habitat aqua on reserve lands, as well as more broadly throughout the territory. And I think this was of extra importance to us, kind of given the relationship that Indigenous people traditionally have with water. They rely on water for their livelihood, spiritual practices, and traditional knowledge for generations. So we really wanted to make sure that they were fully supportive before we felt comfortable moving forward with its use anywhere in the territory. So as I mentioned, we submitted an additional briefing note highlighting this new tool, our interest in using it in certain circumstances, and how we planned on using it, etc. And we were able to receive support for the use of habitat aqua throughout the Saugeen Ojibwe territory. So that's a very quick snapshot into, let's call it the formal engagement that we've undertaken specific to this program. Beyond that, it's a lot of kind of that day-to-day communication with land managers regarding Phragmites control on reserve lands and across the territory. And again, it's not really any different than kind of that communication and relationship we have when communicating with other land managers, for example, at the county level, if we're doing work on county property, private landowners, etc. So really, it's a matter of providing overview of areas where Phragmites exists and where we want to undertake control, discussing different control options, timing, local consideration, cultural considerations, etc., prior to choosing sites and how we want to control them. And then just communication throughout the process. So when the work's actually being done, reporting once Phragmites control work is complete, identifying retreatment requirements, next steps, habitat restoration beyond Phragmites control itself. And then other than that, it's really maintaining and seeking out other opportunities to connect with the communities. That takes a wide, a lot of different ways. I think, for example, the Environment Office, it hosts spring and fall markets, and it's a great opportunity for NCC staff to attend with a booth, and we're able to connect with community members and Environment Office staff and better understand programs as well as initiatives that they're undertaking and the work that they're doing, and allowing us to share the work that we're doing as well. So then, beyond that engagement and relationship building, we've been able to collaborate with our Indigenous partners in a couple of different ways, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more in specific about that. As I mentioned off the top, given we're implementing a landscape scale approach, collaboration really initially took the form of NCC staff, community members, and contractors completing surveys and control of invasive species on reserve lands. And this was largely born out of us submitting our initial briefing note, as I mentioned, and expressing our interest in completing this work. And then I think, through this collaboration and previous relationship building, attending events, all that different type of stuff, we came to better understand programs and initiatives that the SON, or Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, were undertaking. And I did want to just highlight one of those initiatives, and that being the Coastal Waters Monitoring Program. So in short, the Coastal Waters Monitoring Program, or CWMP, is a nearshore monitoring project through the SON Environment Office. And its aim is really building an extensive baseline inventory of the traditional territory's nearshore habitats and wildlife. So the previous map I showed a couple slides ago that highlights the traditional territory running from Tobermory down to Goderich, and kind of over to Collingwood, back up to Tobermory. So a huge area and a huge undertaking in terms of developing that baseline inventory. And they do this work a number of different ways, including fish community monitoring, temperature and water quality monitoring, coastal wetland and aquatic vegetation sampling. And kind of having formed that relationship and understanding CWMP's goals and focus, we were able to seek out and assist CWMP in securing grant funding from the Canadian Wildlife Services branch of the Environment and Climate Change Canada. And this grant really focuses, this grant's focus and deliverables are on species at risk habitat protection through Phragmites control. So in terms of kind of roles through this, the CWMP completes pre and post Phragmites control monitoring for species. And the NCC really comes in providing financial and in-kind support, more specific to coordinating Phragmites control, with that control executed by NCC and Janice Gilbert's team with the Invasive Phragmites Control Center. So I think this is a great example of a partnership that obviously helps both organizations achieve key deliverables and goals. Helping the CWMP to continue to build that baseline inventory and understand relationships between species and invasive Phragmites, and obviously assisting NCC in our landscape scale Phragmites control in the area. And then finally, I know Janice already certainly touched on elephant in the fishing islands, but I did just want to talk briefly about it in terms of highlighting maybe a bit of this work in action from a number of different aspects. So certainly the largest Phragmites control in one concentrated area that NCC has been involved with on the peninsula has been at elephant in the fishing islands. And obviously, as Janice, she provided a great overview in terms of the Elephant Fishing Islands Phragmites community group really starting this and leading the charge there. And a lot of different organizations have been involved, but also understanding that, this area is significant, both from an ecological perspective, but also from a historic and a cultural context. So from that ecological perspective, it's an extremely rich ecological area with the archipelago of islands supporting nearshore, alvar, coastal meadow marsh, fen, forest habitats, all these different types of areas. And it's also an important potential whitefish nursery grounds, and many of the rocky islands support important colonial waterbird breeding colonies. And then beyond that ecological importance, it's also traditionally importance from a historic and a cultural context. So along the peninsula, especially on the west side, there's very few places of natural harbor, with the fishing islands presenting one of the better areas of natural refuge. And as such, it has historically been a significant and the most frequently used portage across the Saugeen Peninsula. And then also, given its significant ecological importance, it's represented a rich source of traditional harvest and has been one of the most important fishing sites within Lake Huron for Indigenous communities. And again, as Janice mentioned, work here has really been a truly collaborative effort with the Fishing Islands Phragmites Community Group, IPCC, the Town of South Bruce, Grace Hobble, a lot of different organizations I'm forgetting, and also Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the Coastal Waters Monitoring Program that I mentioned. Some of the work that they're doing and that we're assisting with is throughout the Fishing Islands as well. So just wanting to take a second to kind of highlight some of that work in action and understanding the greater context, again, not only from that environmental perspective, I think, where a lot of us come from, but better understanding that historic and cultural context as well. So that's actually it for me. I think I zoomed through that a little bit quicker than I had anticipated, but yeah, just wanted to obviously say thank you to Vari and Kyle for inviting me to speak on this, and contact information is up there, and happy to stick around and answer any questions that might come up.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob, for that interesting presentation and overview of what you've been involved with. You want to stay on, we can begin the Q&A. So we are early. We did kind of zip through all the information, but that's okay. It'll provide us more time for questions for our speakers. So if Vari and Janice, you want to come up on stage too, and we can begin to read some of the questions. So in a municipal setting, I often hear frag management. Isn't that a lost cause? I do have a calculated response, but my question for speakers is, what would your go-to response be? This directed to all of you.
Do you want me to go first? Probably, yeah, I've heard that a lot. So basically, and I think Vari or somebody mentioned about the cost of not doing anything. That's really what I try to do is scare the heck out of them and show them pictures of how bad it can get. And at some point you're going to have to deal with it. So why not deal with it when it's not as bad as it's going to get? And it will get bad if you leave it. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is we have lots of success stories. You can absolutely eradicate Phragmites. You just need the right information. And in some cases, I get frustrated because what happens is kind of like a whack-a-mole. Like it's just being done in a very ineffective way. And I don't know why, because we know how to deal with it. So it's getting the right information and getting the right control program in place is key. But there are lots of good examples out there where that it's working really well. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think Janice answered it quite well there. I don't have much to add personally.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree too. I think it's quite a common kind of response to all sorts of invasive species, including Phragmites, is, oh, well, what's the point? It's too hard. But I think the costs of not doing anything, as has been mentioned a few times, are too high, both socially, culturally, environmentally, financially, for all of us as individuals and beyond. It does make it a much more compelling case to actually step in and do some management. And as we saw from several presentations, there's some really cool success stories that really did start with a couple of people with some raspberry cane cutters on the beach that have resulted in actually a measurable landscape scale management close to eradication, or certainly management down to much more kind of appropriate and less damaging levels on the landscape. So I think I take heart from that, and I would encourage the audience to do so as well, and do their best to make a start.
Great. Another upvoted question, were native plantings or seeding a part of post-frag removal? If yes, was there better success with blocking reincursions of frag?
I could jump in with some general advice on that, but Janice, I'm sure you'll have some real life examples perhaps. So my understanding from kind of the literature and some research that's happening and some kind of real life experiences is that it kind of depends on the situation. So if you're looking to start a project, if you're in a relatively intact natural area with lots of seed sources from native plants, then you might be fine. You might not need to do too much active restoration in terms of planting native plants. If you're in a system that's quite far from a native seed source, or it's like a kind of urban stormwater management pond or that kind of situation, then you may need to do some proactive seeding. There's a few things to consider with that. We're actually working on a little addition to the guidebook to try and give a little bit of guidance on that. The idea being that you can actually initiate some restoration with annual native plants, even during your frag management program, to try to kind of get a little bit of native seeds into that seed bank to start recreating some of those ecological systems again. Obviously, you don't want to invest in perennial plants until you're actually done with working in there with machinery or herbicides and things like that. But you can certainly do a little bit of augmentation with native plants carefully along the way. But I'll let others that have some kind of real life on the ground experience, perhaps with or without native plant establishment, to chime in.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Vari. Just a couple of things I would add. I found that it depends what was there pre-frag. So if you had another highly invasive plant like, I don't know, canary reed grass, I guess what's going to come back, because that's what was in the seed bank, right? So you may have to control that plant and then help establish a more variety of the native plants. The thing is, as Vari mentioned, it does depend the disturbance. So if you're in an area that was like a created wetland, you may not have the seed bank in that soil. So you may have to help the native plants along. And also too, if you think about it, what you really are trying to do with helping promote vegetation is cover the ground so that if there's any frag seeds that might happen to come into an area, blow into an area, they have a tougher time getting through the vegetation to land on the moist soil to germinate. So that's one way they can spread. And I saw there was a question about asking about that. That's not the only way frag spreads. It can spread from any viable plant part or any, but seeds are one way, windborne, and not all of them are viable. But I think if you attended the Ontario Farmers Working Group meeting, there actually I think that the talks are also going to get posted. But Jessica Smeekins from Ministry of Transportation spoke about some research that they're doing by roadsides, where planting native plants that are salt tolerant and grow quick to cover up the ground real fast with some native plants that are low maintenance, but also actually stop frag from spreading into those areas, which is really interesting as well. But there are some seed mixes MTO has, as does NCC and some other entities that actually do a lot of the restoration work in some natural areas to provide some guidance. And if you don't know this, there is a range. Like, you want to get your native plant seed source local, as local as possible, not from outside of a region. That's important too, which NCC folks are more first that than I am. But
all right. Another question, Corey is curious to see if anyone here is from the Peterborough, Norwood, Hastings area interested in collaboration for Phragmites. So maybe, I don't know if a good way might be to reach out to you directly in the networking, or.
yeah, we're doing work for Trent University, so I can provide the contact there. Maybe that person would be interested to help broaden the project off of the university grounds to help get a community group going. There's actually I know there's a couple of other people doing work in that area, Phragmites control work. I have to look in my notes to find their contacts, but you're not alone in that area. There's more groups are very interested to get going. I just can't offhand think of their names, unfortunately.
Yeah, just with that, it may be worth connecting as well with the local conservation authorities to see, most likely they've had conversations with folks if nothing is currently going on, but likely in the past with interested groups and municipalities in that area.
Yeah, good one. And then there's a question for Jacob. Would you happen to have a copy or generic agreement with the group in order to use the Habitat Aqua for our municipal environment group? And she has her email here. So maybe she can reach out to you. Questions.
Yeah, I could certainly send a quick email, and we maybe can connect and share some of the resources that we've used, certainly.
Yeah, that sounds good. Another question, what suggestions do speakers have for working with private landowners in urban settings, such as industrial areas? So kind of private landowners in urban settings.
Yeah, I can take a stab, and then I'll probably pass it to Kyle. We at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, we haven't done a huge amount of work in urban settings to date. So my advice would probably be fairly general. I think just drawing on some of the things that we've tried to emphasize today, to make connections and try to build some relationships, work out what the common ground might be. It's quite possible that there might be sick of the sightlines being blocked by frag, or worry about the fire risk of the standing dead biomass behind their warehouse, or should be if they knew about it. So think along the lines of what kind of conversation might be the most kind of productive and engaging when you meet with people. Download the resources or direct them to the resources on the Green Shovels Collaborative website and on the Ontario Invasive Plant Council website, the best management practices, the cost benefit analysis. And when it's there, the guidebook itself, that's kind of broadly speaking some of the advice that I would give. But I don't know if some of the other speakers might have some maybe more specific engagement advice.
Yeah, we do work in urban areas, like we're working with the City of London. And so our approach is to go knock on the doors and say, look, we're controlling this plant, and give them that information. And many times they're interested to get it off their property, because it may be plugging one of their drainage, ditches off, drains their parking lots or whatever, or causing some other issues. And as you mentioned, Vari, is blocking their sight line where they're coming out of the parking lot to see past to get out of their parking lots safely, those kinds of things. So try to make it more personal for them, that they would want to invest to get it off their property. Particularly if there's a program already going on in that area, or if they're adjacent to some natural lands and they want to be a good citizen, just play on that string. And then you could maybe say what great company they are. You somehow promote the work they're doing. In that sense, give them kudos for sure. And also to find that a lot of people that work in these places, they want to help do something positive. These companies want to help do something positive. So usually there's a really good uptake from these companies as well. And I don't know if that was the intent of your question, like asking how to get those kinds of lands cleaned up. Sorry.
Could you comment on the mechanical management of frag and any mitigation to overwintering reptiles and amphibians that may get crushed? Think of my hometown, Port Franks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, it's timing. We don't do any work in wetlands in the spring. We wait till mid-July when the fish spawning regulations are lifted and the turtles and that, it's warm enough that they're active, and we go slow. And if we have to go back and do any work for mulching, we do it when it's cold. It's the worst time for our operators and our equipment, because it's horrible weather. But there's not going to be any animals out and about. Even a mild winter day, the turtles will be active, or at least kind of moving around a bit. And so we try to mitigate as much as possible. But you also have to know your landscape. And so you have to avoid the hummocks. You have to avoid the areas where the turtles might possibly be. Our operators do not go over any open water, if the tracks can possibly touch the muck, because you might have some frogs or toads that even and turtles just burrow just sitting down there under the water, under the ice. So it's all about understanding these systems and these animals. And I speak a lot to herpetologists and try to get my best practices from them, from their knowledge, and also the local communities, local nature groups, and that they know the systems that you might be working in, and get information from them where areas to avoid. So that's something that I'm very strong about in advocating. So not just anybody should be working in these systems. You want people working in them that really have a high level of knowledge about how to mitigate harm.
Mm-hmm. And connecting with that is whether there's any information on bird roosting, nesting, breeding inside Phragmites patches. If any of you know any studies, information.
Mm-hmm. They use the edges, even the least bittern. And they are their longest nesting, that they'll be nesting, they'll have their broods right into August. So you have to be aware of that. Marsh wrens, even, yeah. So again, they'll use the edges, they'll use the frag for structure because they have nothing else to nest in. So you have to be aware of that if you're removing the Phragmites, but also to if you're going through nice habitat to get to the Phragmites. So you absolutely have to be aware of that. And there's, of course, Migratory Birds Act and all that you shouldn't be out there doing any work when the birds are in the spring. I don't feel like nobody should be in these wetlands. You don't need to be. There's a timing aspect to it.
What is the best universal GIS mapping tool that can be readily accessed by multiple groups and municipalities? I learned Peterborough County has their own internal GIS map and doesn't use ESMAPs, and there's a couple other municipalities that do that too. I know.
Kyle, you're on mute.
Yeah, I keep hitting the mute little icon rather than the button. So this is actually a one that comes up pretty often, and for the most part, it's hard to know what exactly the right tool is for the job. I think the thing that's kind of a benefit for municipalities such as say Peterborough County that's using GIS. A lot of organizations like NCC, Ducks Unlimited, a lot of NGOs have their internal GIS programs as well, and they run off of Esri, which is the company that runs ArcMap and those key programs that they're running. Obviously, for smaller groups, that becomes really expensive when it comes to getting licensing and things like that, and having the knowledge to run that. And so, tools like EdMaps, and we were talking earlier about other ones like iNaturalist as well, and FragSpotter, which have been around and could be used in a similar way. Basically, you're looking for this. It's more the information that you're collecting rather than maybe the platform that you're using, because from a municipal perspective, integrating into their existing ArcGIS work is going to be really easy, but it's not going to be easy for, say, a volunteer-led group or a group that is maybe doesn't have as much resource in that sense. So EdMaps and other tools like that are really handy, using the location on your phone and then being able to upload photos for verification, get information about the size and extent of the problem. But really what it comes down to is these are shareable across the different platforms. So EdMaps you can use in ArcGIS, and you can kind of go back and forth, use it along, say, Google Earth as well. So being able to have a point, just locational data in terms of, if it's a point, if it's a polygon, it's a line showing the extent of the problem, if it can include other information about, if you have dry or wet topography, so that you know what kind of approach to use in that sense, the density, certain things like that, you can build into that information that's shared across this platform. So it's more, I guess, what you're able to collect, and it's really that locational data is really important, and being able to speak to the different programs. And maybe Janice, I'll pass it over to you on this one.
Yeah, it's you hit all the big ones there, Kyle. It does really depend, doesn't it, on who is in need of this and what's the intent. So for smaller groups that aren't even familiar with the GPS unit, that it's just a section of road that they know their community so well, they can kind of say where it is and how big the patch is, and then also too, like, so what kind of information do you want to collect, and the reason why, and the big thing is how best to kill it, right? Is there water there? Well, that's going to dictate what your options are, how deep the water is, and these kinds of things. So, but the mapping's a big one, because for two reasons. It helps the extent of it in your scope of where you want to control, but also to helps you track success, right? Have to track the decline of frag through time. If it's the proof of concept that what you're doing is successful. So I see that as two things, and I always with my photos are like they just are so helpful. So not only do you pinpoint where it is, but provide some photos so that you can see visually the extent of what you're looking at. And the other piece to that, which we talked about earlier this morning, sorry, at a different meeting, was trying to figure out, do you have invasive or native frags? So are you actually mapping invasive frags? So there's a component to that as well that has to be addressed. But for the most part, it's invasive. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling there. But when I first worked with Nancy Vidler's group, the first management plan we did for the municipality, she had a map of the area that the municipality gave her, and they just color coded it. And then the municipality hired a summer student with GIS skills, and she took their information and my information and some from roads and kind of put it all together to create an overarching map of where it was throughout the whole municipality. So there's ways to be creative about this. And these young folks are so savvy with technology. Maybe you tap into those folks as well that have some mapping skills.
And those photos you had in your presentation really told a story too. How successful.
Yes, they're worth 1,000 words. You forget quick how bad it used to be. So it's helpful for sure to have photos through time.
And adding to mechanical management, I think the herbicide that was approved for use in water was approved pretty recently. What can you tell communities who are concerned with herbicides in wetlands use?
I'm a wetland ecologist. You've got folks from Nature Conservancy of Canada. You know what their mandate is. None of us want to do more harm than good. All of these, if it's available legally to use in water, it's been well vetted, well researched. The Habitat Aqua has been used in the States since the 70s, I think, like numerous decades. No hint of issues. They actually have a glyphosate product as well they've been using. No hint of issues. We only have a dryland application for glyphosate products, but we also, I feel, need a second active ingredient out there. But yeah, of course, herbicides can, if you're not familiar with them, with their use, of course, there's concern, and that's a good thing. And I guess it's a trust factor that who is doing this work in these habitats is doing it appropriately, and certainly there's an awareness of the products that we're using from my end, and I know from NCC's, we wouldn't be doing this work if it was going to cause issues. That's my answer to that question. I'm sure NCC has more to add.
I think, I mean, not speaking specifically to the herbicides, but it's part of the conversations often is it's not, a blanket approach in terms of when we're controlling Phragmites. It's not herbicide or nothing. It's identifying each stand and understanding what are the restrictions associated with that and what are the best control methods. And there's different types of control methods that you can use even with herbicides. So understanding that when you're looking at density, intermixed native vegetation, all these different types of things, right? So it's, I think like Janice said, we're all environmentalists. I think we're doing this for a specific reason. And I've never thought I'd be one to advocate for the use of herbicides. So I think we're, extremely cautious when we're talking about using these. And it's, again, a case by case basis when we do decide to use herbicide.
Here's an interesting question here. Besides reoccurring funding, what do you think is the biggest cause of Phragmites program paralysis, and any suggestions to overcome barriers?
Phragmites paralysis, I like it. Yeah, it's a great question. I think we are seeing quite a lot of grassroots groups overcoming that paralysis, and I think both Janice and Jacob's presentations were particularly heartening in that regard. I'm going to say it again, that the working group concept and collaborating across different sectors and the community, both industrially speaking, socially, the whole works, are the key factors. Certainly multi-year funding and multi-year permitting and authorizations are obstacles that we're working through and have gotten significant improvements in those areas in recent years. So yeah, I don't know if I have really any kind of magic bullet. Maybe someone else does, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like from my perspective, some of what I've seen prior to green shovels coming on board. So grateful for that. There was burnout. A lot of these groups have been working at this for so long without much support, funding support or otherwise. And so I think there's a big shift now, and that's huge. So I'm hoping that there's less burnout happening with these local community groups. But the program paralysis, I guess, in my interpretation of that, where I go to is I hear these stories time and time again where somebody had a Phragmites control program and they stopped because it wasn't working. And so I asked, well, what did you do? And so when I hear what they were doing, they go, oh, okay. So I think a lot of it is just getting the right information out, what doesn't work, because we have a long list. We know what doesn't work. There's been a lot of trials and errors through the years, and we do absolutely know what does work. And that doesn't mean we're not still learning. Of course we are. Every year we're learning more, getting better. But we do have we have the really good information on how to be successful. So I would say that, and having this type of workshop is really important to help get groups, provide some guidance to get some work going in these areas where there's not any work going yet. So providing support for that, and Green Shovels again is huge in trying in getting these programs supported. That was always a missing piece, honestly, a big missing piece. And then having an entity like Nature Conservancy that's able to come in and help with these bigger initiatives that are needed with that takes a lot bigger group than some of the local community groups, a lot more undertaking, like for instance the Oliphant project, so that support is really key as well. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, and I don't know if you have a specific program paralysis example you wanted to expand on.
Maybe they could reach out to you. More questions. Has someone planted buckwheat to stop Phragmites? Any?
Kind of hope not, because it's not native either, would be my initial reaction. I mean, one of the reasons that we have these challenges that we've been able to measure with Phragmites is that many of our native ecosystems are just not able to compete against it. It has invaded even remarkably intact, incredibly biodiverse ecosystems in southwestern Ontario. So it's kind of unfortunately does require some intervention by us using some of the methods that you've seen today. There's a bunch of research happening on biocontrol with a couple of moth species actually, which is showing some early signs of promise. But I'm not sure of what other plants to recommend. I mean, I think during the kind of restoration phase, post management activities, then there's probably a good biodiverse mix of native perennial species that would be a good choice depending on where you are. That would help keep your site ideally a bit less invaded moving forward. But once it's in and established, then it really does require these perhaps more heavily Herculean tasks of intervention. But I'll pass it to the practitioners in the group to see if they've got some real life experiences and some other examples of plants that might be helpful.
Yeah, the one thing that you had mentioned, Vari, the annuals, and sometimes what for doing some restoration work to get vegetation coverage real quick, use something like white millet. It grows real fast and it covers the ground, and then the annuals and the perennials can start they're a little bit slower typically to come in after. So it's a quick ground cover that's not going to stick like buckwheat would and take over.
Okay, and CBC is looking to interview successful areas of getting rid of Phragmites. Who can I refer them to? Her name, contact at CBC is Chantel Dubuc.
I guess, you know, either to IPCC or even like to Janice. Janice had some great examples here as well. You know, Jacob had mentioned a great job that they're doing at Zoggy and Bruce. So another one that I'm probably going to plug. But, you know, in general, I mean, you could, you know, our two organizations would be more than happy as well. You know, there is a few different examples that came out with the invasive species control fund last year. So, you know, like reaching out, I guess, to green shovels in general in that sense, you know, is good. Invasive Species Center had led that, but I mean, there's more more than can count, I guess, in terms of potential projects and groups to interview.
Any special groups in the Phragmites community specifically targeting restoration of PSWs regarding funding, helping crafting letters to municipalities, in-kind services, etc.?
Maybe I'll just kind of hop in on this one to start. So there, you know, there are a few NGOs like NCC is doing some work in you know, in some PSWs. When it comes to funding, a lot of what I've noticed is typically there's provincial or federal grant systems that really cater to these type of, say, you know, for example, coastal sites along the Great Lakes, for example. And you know, sometimes it can get, you have to get a little crafty with wording in the sense of getting some of the applications through and making sure that you're covering off the deliverables that they'd like. And you know, there's always those connections. As for crafting letters, there are some services that there are some templates in the end of the guidebook as well that help with certain things when it, you know, working with, say, a letter of support to the MNRF. And with respect to municipalities, you know, Janice might be able to answer this in a little bit better with respect to in-kind services and stuff, but there are groups that, you know, typically they partner up in terms of, you know, either contract work or a partnership with an organization to be able to, you know, collaborate and do the work as a group.
Yeah, there's a lot of municipalities that provide in-kind, CAs as well. So, you know, those entities. And then, yeah, certainly with NCC or my entity, we try to provide as much in-kind support as we can to help you get established. A lot of, I find, success community projects, there's a lot of volunteer efforts going on. And there's a lot of skill set to draw on in your community as well. So it doesn't have to be physical labor either. It can be someone's really good at writing or setting up a website or, you know, writing a research proposal, whatever. So it's just building on your network, people that you know, to help build your team. Yeah, and of course, you know, a lot of us work in wetlands, provincially significant wetlands or not. They're all, to me, they're all important ecosystems. So you know, there's a lot, as Kyle mentioned, there are some funding. There's funding available for restoration protection of our larger coastal or wetland systems, species at risk funding and whatnot. Just targeting your program to meet those proposals. But some of them are a little bit, how would I say, a little bit. You have to have someone that's good at writing to get through them, or has done them before. Some of them there's a lot of work to them, and there's a lot of reporting at the other end. So some groups have people that are really good at that and have accountants to help them with the number crunching and reporting where the money went, the buckets it has to go into, and reporting back, those kinds of things. So it just really depends on the scale of your project and how much money you're actually going after too. And I don't know if that answered your question.
We have another one on herbicides. Is there, in applying herbicides, is there an acceptable level of collateral damage? And if so, what is that and how is it conceived and managed?
I can take an initial stab at this, but again, we'll defer to the practitioners. I think, again, it's worth remembering the collateral of not doing any intervention with Phragmites. We've seen ecosystems in particularly southwestern Ontario where it's been established for several decades now, where there's, as Janice I think mentioned, to use her wording, kind of ecological dead zones, particularly in the heart of some of these real monoculture patches. So we have been managing collectively across the community many of these patches and seeing huge biodiversity gains really remarkably quickly, a handful of years after management. And as Jacob mentioned, that herbicide is not the only tool. Depending on the situation, then you can use mechanical means. You can use mechanical means both on wet areas and on beaches as well. So there's a number of different techniques, and they all have the risk of some kind of collateral damage. There's no route that we can take with these important ecosystems that doesn't have some degree of collateral, including doing nothing. And I think the collateral of doing nothing generally outweighs the collateral of management. As you'll see from the best management practices on the OIPC website, there's a lot of timing window advice in there, both advice, but also there's legislated timing windows for various aspects of control. So herbicide use and mechanical control all require some degree of permitting and authorization, much of which is kind of underpinned by timing windows for biological processes, whether it's breeding birds or breeding fish, spawning fish, or even in some cases species at risk plants. So following, kind of weaving your way through all of that network of rules and guidance and legislation, you arrive at the least damaging control method and timing and so forth. But I think bearing in mind that the cost of doing nothing is possibly the highest cost compared with the following the instructions and following the guidance and using qualified, careful people that Janice mentioned is really your way to go. But happy to hear from others from the field that have additions to that.
Sure. Just to build on that real quick with our team, like one of the things is making sure that you have a skilled and qualified team. And luckily we've got that and great, folks that we work with external to NCC. But, it's a lot of it too is scale and the approach, right? So in a lot of areas where we're spraying, it's heavy, dense, frag is really the only thing that's present. We do take a lot of, make sure that our equipment is up to date and working effectively. We also use STA loggers on our sprayers to be able to track the amount of flow and GPS to record exactly where treatment's occurring. And keeping in mind, having a good operator is able to, be able to work well with the conditions that they're in. And really, the big thing is spraying the leaves and the tissue, the above ground tissue of the plant. And that with the products that we use for Phragmites, it's a systemic, so it's going to work its way into the roots. So really, you're not just broadcasting spray across, everything that you see across the ground, but just, you can take a very effective and targeted approach as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that just a couple of things. As already mentioned, is the approach. So in some areas, it looks, be so much more efficient if you had an ATV and just driving through and spot spraying with your backpack. But we don't, because there's really rare plants and we could harm frogs and turtles and whatnot. So we walk. It takes a lot more time, a lot more energy, effort, but it's the most appropriate way to do it. You're walking these large distances and spot spraying, and you can do that because the ground's solid enough the crew can walk. So it's an approach that sometimes may not be as efficient, but it's more environmentally responsible. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. The other thing I would say is know your product, and if you are actually the one that is applying the herbicide, you need to know the difference between a glyphosate-based product and an imazapyr-based product. Imazapyr will kill a mature tree. Even if you think you're far away from it, there may be some roots that come way out beyond the drip line. So you have to be exceedingly careful with the herbicides that you need to know. So again, I don't think you want anybody with just any old herbicide license doing this work in these sensitive habitats. There's a lot of training and knowledge base that has to occur before you can actually do this work and not have more collateral damage than you should have. So it's the approach, it's the type of equipment, it's the timing, it's the herbicides. There's all of that, those considerations that you need to take into account.
Right. Thanks. And connecting with that, who is ultimately responsible for the health and safety of field participants? Is liability insurance a barrier for local working groups?
Do you want me to? it is an issue, and that's why I mentioned. That's why I really want to talk about the Kincardine Residents Against Phragmites, that group, what they did about that. So a lot of the volunteer groups, they'll have their volunteers sign a waiver, absolving them of any, issues if somebody does get hurt when they're out volunteering. So that's a possibility if it's just a volunteer group. If you're hiring a contractor, the contractor should have all of the liability coverage. Right now, I think it's up to $5 million if you're using herbicides. And you want to make sure that your contractor has that coverage if you're hiring them to do the work for you. Again, if you don't have the insurance, I think, I don't know if it's FOCA or Ontario, one of those groups does supply insurance for some groups to do the work. I believe they have insurance under their umbrella. Do you guys, are you aware of that? Is it FOCA that supplies it?
I'm not too sure, but I would take a gamble and say it was FOCA, but it'd be best to check for like associations. But I know OFH has it for insurance for their memberships for hunting and fishing. But
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Are you familiar with the overall benefit fund for SAR permits? I wonder if corporations can fund Phragmites projects to offset their construction impacts elsewhere. I think it's with select species.
thanks. This is a good one to look into. I know they're like I'm not familiar with this, but environmental damages fund, for example, is one where I've seen typically what'll happen in this case is after a company's been fined or once they have the funds together, they'll put out a call for projects, and that's one that we can definitely address and ask our contacts within the federal and provincial governments if this is made. It's a great idea.
Great. And there's just a question here. I think maybe Var, you could get into the question about where the guidebook is. I'm sure others are wondering as well.
Yeah, so it will be available very soon on the Green Shovels Collaborative website. So if you Google Green Shovels Collaborative, you'll find actually quite a few of the other resources that we've referenced today there, including the cost-benefit analysis and a kind of higher-level Phragmites strategy that we put together a couple of years ago now. The guidebook will be available there soon. If you're desperately in need of some bedtime reading tonight, then drop me an email and we'll get a draft copy out to you. There are a few edits that we're still working through, so it's not the nice, pretty final version yet. But if you're itching to get your hands on it, then give us a shout. We'll get a copy out to you.
Just to clarify though, the original, so the September draft is up right now, but we have a new one that will be we can circulate to the group at another point. But we do have the old copy that Vari has is available on the guidebook. I'll drop it in the chat, or sorry, on the website.
Awesome. And this was directed to you, Janice, when you were presenting the different community groups. What was the name of the municipalities? Our municipal environmental committee would like to contact a few. Maybe they could get in touch with you.
Sure, there's a number of municipalities that are doing work actually. So But if it's specific to the examples that there's the Municipality of Lambton Shores, Municipality of Kincardine. There's a town of South Bruce Peninsula.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that was the question. It's awesome.
And then on Manitoulin Island, I don't know if she wants to Tuckamuh Municipality. But yeah, there are many others actually. City of London, they have actually not only Phragmites, but an invasive species program in collaboration with the Upper Thames Valley Conservation Authority as well. So there's lots of examples of municipalities doing lots of great work and assisting the fragging community as well with in-kind support.
Okay, so I think to add to that question was, our mayor sits on our board and you'd like information from other municipalities that have done some work. That is why I need the name of a few municipalities to not reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Does Phragmites spread more with seeds?
Do you want me to just they've done studies on viability of seeds. So if it's a colony, it's just had the one parent, and then it spread from that. The viability is quite low, like 1% to 3%, something like that. So there's a lot of seeds, but they're not all viable. Thank goodness for that. If there's cross pollination occurring, so you have a little bit more genetic makeup in the seeds, you can get up to about 40% viability in the seeds.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, even one seedling can cause an issue, of course. Like everywhere frag is, it started with one plant, right? So seeds, yeah, they blow in the wind and, they can disperse that way. They can also disperse from any viable plant part. So if your frag plant is growing along a river or the shoreline of the lake and there's wave action and it breaks it and it falls in the water, during the growing season, the roots can start at the node and a shoot can start at the node. So that floats along and then it lands on moist, exposed sediment and it takes root and it starts its own colony. So it can spread that way. The below ground structures, like if you're excavating out Phragmites or you're digging a ditch or whatever, and there it is, and you put that plant in a pile of dirt and you take that dirt somewhere else and spread it, guess what you are spreading? It's not just the seeds that can, so the root sections that have any viable nodes on them, the rhizomes or stolons. So the only blessing we have with the seeds is, as far as I know, they're not viable multiple years. Like cattail, they've done studies in seed banks where 80, 100 years you can still have viability. Not so frag. Like if they haven't germinated in the spring, the following, like later in the season and into the next year, those seeds fortunately are not viable unless there's been new research that I'm not aware of. So that's the one blessing that we have with Phragmites, thank goodness.
That's good. We're starting to wrap up a bit with questions. There's one about biocontrol. Has your group tried the moth method, or I guess any group in general that's been discussed? The biocontrol method's been tried. I think it's just in the research stage, as far as I know.
Sure, I'll jump in on that. So yeah, there has been there's about 20 plus years of research that was put into I guess the moth trials first to make sure that through CFIA, before they introduce this as a method, making sure that it's not going to impact native plants or agricultural plants as well. So back in 2019, it received approval for release on the ground. And so basically there's been a few different areas where there's been trial releases. At this point, I think there's 3 years total that there's been release in kind of test areas. And what they've been able to see is some suppression, some promising results with some suppression, but also the insects themselves being able to overwinter and then kind of establish their a very small local population. So it's still quite a ways away from, say, an effective tool for frag at this point, but it's showing some promising results in the research stage.
Question. I'm a farmer and we're trying to save our wetland. Also, as a farmer, we don't mind spraying into our buffer zones, but I need to know who can give us the approval to spray into these zones.
If you're using a backpack sprayer, you can spray right to the water's edge. You just have to be aware, how to mitigate that spray going into the water, because it's not supposed to legally, and it shouldn't, because it does some harm. So what we do, if we're spraying along the water's edge, we're in the water spraying back towards land. So we're either working out of a boat or out of waders, and we have the wind at our back. So then you get a nice edge along the water's edge, and then you can go up on land and kind of get what's on that side. So that's one approach that you can take. As a farmer, I think you have access to the products you need. Just need to know what the right recipe is. And that's important, by the way. That's critically important.
Do you have the dates we cannot spray on Phragmites with drones? Same
You
person.
cannot spray with a drone, period. It's not on the label. If that method is not on the label, you cannot legally use that, whatever application method you're using. So drones have not been approved for. I think the only product that recently was approved for drone spraying was Diquat, I think. Yeah, which is really weird. But anyway, there's no other product in Canada that you can spray out of a drone legally, just so you know.
If you are working on land instead of water, do you have to remove all the biomass? We have been removing root and seed head, leaving stalks in a pile. Seems too much waste to pull it all out.
So the reason why you don't want your cut stalks floating around is what I mentioned, that they can develop a root and a shoot on the stalks laying in the water that are moist. If you can pile all of your cut stalks and just monitor your pile, if it can dry out, the sun can dry it out, then it's fine. As long as you put it in a place that you're not putting over rare plants or in an area that's going to harm wildlife. You have it in a place that makes sense to put your pile, and then just monitor it. You can go back, and if there's any frag that's been sprouting on your pile, you just pull it out of the pile and lay it on top to dry out. As long as it's not exposed to wave action where the waves are going to wash your pile away. So you just have to be a little bit strategic where you put your piles.
And then going back to restoration, do native plants reestablish effectively after frag is removed, or do you do something to help them get started?
Janice, I know you've been chatting a bunch, so maybe I'll take this as a low-hanging fruit one. I think I can take here. Yeah, and so it's really I'll speak from NCC's perspective, at least with this. We typically wait with any of the restoration work that we've been doing, and we've just been what Vari had shared earlier about using annuals. This is through recent conversations with the folks with Rebecca Rooney and the folks at University of Waterloo, but we've been kind of holding off on reseeding and restoration within the first few years of within at least 3 years of treatment, because there's typically some retreatment taking place. The idea of using annuals is really good in that sense of breaking off that, not impacting, say, a perennial plant that you're going to be planting through the treatment. So the one thing, are in, say, let's say wet areas, our seed bank, like the seed banks are pretty strong. So typically in, the areas where you had a lot of cattails, a lot of native plants growing in aquatic sites, we see resurgence of those just from the native seed bank being able to come up. Usually they're good for about 20 years is kind of the term that you hear a bit. Areas that would likely need, some of the stuff that we've been hearing as well through U of Waterloo is areas that would need a little bit more work are the ones that have been completely disturbed. So if we're thinking roadside, if there was some disturbance where they removed a bunch of the original plant material in the soil that was there, likely they're not going to have that native seed bank, and you're going to want to be a bit more aggressive with the restoration. And so that's a little bit of kind of how we've been approaching it, but I'll pass it along if anybody has anything else to add.
And that, as being a former Ducks Unlimited guy, Jacob would also know this with the beaver pond management. You do have to do the drawdowns, so water depths do factor in, right? So when the lake levels were high, 2019, 20, it really delayed the some of these plants because the water depths were too deep. Now that the lake levels are dropping, I think there's going to be a real resurgence in our native aquatic wetland plants typically. So there are other factors besides just getting rid of the frag that come into play with the native vegetation. And as Jacob alluded to, like, sometimes you just have to have some patience, let Mother Nature kind of heal on her own time scale. You may not have to do much. It really depends on what the conditions were like prior to frag, I would say.
Great. And some of the remaining questions we have here are mostly comments or asking for contact info, so it might be better to add it to the chat. So I'll just ask maybe 2-3 more questions. I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to, but is there a consequence report somewhere? Consequence to insects, water quality when cattails are killed by Phragmites, bees, less food along roads.
Yeah, I just actually posted a link to the Ontario Invasive Plant Council Best Management Practices for Phragmites in the chat back to Jeanette, because I think there's some information there about general impacts of frag to species at risk and other animals. So there is an increasing body of literature out there, both grey literature and peer-reviewed science, demonstrating negative impacts of Phragmites on insect biodiversity and therefore, in turn, other wildlife like birds that require those insects to complete their life cycles. It's pretty competitive against plants, native plants as well. So that's why we end up with these monoculture situations. So there are in some cases, specific species at risk plants that we know are being crowded out and threatened by Phragmites. And certainly, it follows that there's impacts on insect biota like bees and things like that. So yeah, hopefully between the resources on the Ontario Invasive Plant Council website and the Green Shovels Collaborative website, there'll be some good resources if you're kind of needing to find some sort of, should we call it, ammunition to go and galvanize some support to start some Phragmites management in your area.
And I will add to that, Varius, you will know the research by Courtney Robichaud when she was getting her PhD in Rebecca Rooney's lab at University of Waterloo, that she looked at that specifically, the aquatic invertebrates, the insect population and the foraging birds and whatnot. It's a really good research there. She gave if you Google her, there's a few webinars that she gave, and I know the information is on Rebecca Rooney's site at the University of Waterloo, and also Courtney Robichaud as well. So there's that information, as well as what the other information sites that were mentioned. There's the Great Lakes Phragmites Collaborative that has a long list of research. They collaborate that every month and post that. They have the webinars. I think Courtney actually may have given a webinar about her research, or Rebecca. There's a lot of information available out there if you're just learning about Phragmites and you have a lot of questions about specific things. There's no shortage of resources for you.
Are you aware of any groups working on Phragmites removal in the Kingston or Frontenac County area?
Nature Conservancy of Canada's kickstarting a few Phragmites management projects on our properties and on kind of road allowances next door to our properties, and so we're starting to get active in that area with frag. Others probably have some more to add to that.
Yes, I'm sorry. I this is for Kingston Frontenac area. Yeah, be best to reach out to Holly Evans at Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority. And I know she's been involved in developing a working group in that area.
Mm-hmm. And Ontario Parks as well down that way are starting to do some projects as well. So there's some nice synergies there, and some partnerships could be formed for sure.
Here's a comment. The ISC's Municipal Community of Practice might be a good place for connections with municipalities doing work with FRAG across the province. Here's a question. Oh, that's a good one. What do you feel is the next invasive species to replace FRAG as the worst? Miscanthus?
I love that question. Thank you. Usually at the end of my presentations, I show a picture. I've been watching this grass. It's a pretty grass, isn't it? In the fall, it's nice and pink and stem, and it's got the white fluffy. It outcompetes frag. I actually had a gentleman from Waterloo, contact me a few years ago and say, "Hey, I have the solution for frag. Let's plant this plant." I'm there. No. If you've been paying attention up 400, going north, it's on the right. It's on the right-hand side, and it's spreading back into the forest there. And so I've been telling Ministry of Transportation, please, 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 if you have contractors dealing with frag, and there's silvergrass, have them nail that sucker too, because that's going to be a problem. I think more like drier feet as opposed to wetter feet. But if anything that could outcompete frag is it's a bit of a warning sign to me. But I mean, we've got, what do we have? Japanese knotweed. I can't believe how bad it is, Jacob, up in your area. It's crazy. And then of course is the buckthorn. The birds are helping us a lot spread. There's some other ones that are very problematic, but for wetland plants, I think the one that's pay attention to what's happening in the States is the a flowering rush. They're seeing where they've been controlling Phragmites in areas. The flowering rush is taking over, so that's one to watch. I actually have a site in Windsor where that's happening, so that's one to pay attention to. Frog bit was a problem, right? In some areas where down at Long Point. Yeah, you guys may have some others. Somebody's got a cat going.
Yeah, that was me. So I was just the two frogbit and flowering rush. Flowering rush, I did a lot of work in coastal wetlands on Lake Ontario. And what was really interesting, it is one that it's very early, it seems right now, but it's starting to really take off. And I'm glad you mentioned that one, Janice. And it is interesting how it really growing on those edges as well of kind of taking over the habitat more towards open water from the fragment on the outside is what I was kind of seeing. And a lot of new shoots that would get caught up on submerged vegetation that was kind of topped out on the surface. They'd be kind of sitting right on top in open water on top of the other plants and just a new sprout ready to wash up on shore. So definitely one to keep an eye on. And yeah, miscanthus. I get excited whenever I get to talk about any invasives in some ways, but aquatic ones. But those would be the biggest ones that seem to be of concern right now. And starry stonewort, which is just a difficult one that it's a macroalgae that there's no real effective management that's available right now, and it's difficult.
I would just add and maybe conclude this a little bit by saying that try not to let you get disheartened, but the idea of embarking on Phragmites management or management of any other invasive species, it is unfortunately an ongoing kind of management challenge. But our best defense to be able to keep robust biodiverse ecosystems is to actually embark on management of these things as they turn up, and ideally before they take hold, like Phragmites has taken hold in southwestern Ontario. Our best defense against future invaders that may have even bigger economic and environmental costs really is to try to get back to some more resilient, restored ecosystems. And unfortunately, there's plenty more things waiting in the wings with our, globalized world that we find ourselves in. But don't give up, because there's lots of keen, busy people that are always keen to share advice and resources to make this actually doable.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. That's a very good way to kind of conclude these questions. And yeah, so I wrote the BMP for flowering rush a few years ago for OIPC. I couldn't believe just how invasive it was. I remember, I've just seen it once or twice, and along the river where I live, but it can be pretty invasive in certain areas. So thank you so much, all of you, for helping me answer. That was a lot of questions to go through, and we typically don't have the time to answer that many questions in our webinar. So I'm happy we were able to go through so many. There's still a few just general comments and things we can add into the chat, and people can always get in touch with you guys if they have more questions. So I'd just like to conclude with some closing remarks. So just thank you everyone for a great day, and thanks everyone for participating. We hope you got a lot out of today's webinar, and we heard some great information from our speakers on the importance of establishing a working group, making connections, engaging with First Nations, some great examples of control projects. And I just wanted to pull up just the schedule for tomorrow. So just if you could see it here. Yeah. So for day 2, we're going to go over again the regional plan guidebook, permits and authorization with Tom Cowan, and then implementation with Brett Norman. And then we also have the quiz. So if you're interested in completing the quiz and getting your certificate of completion, Emily will have that information in the chat tomorrow, as well as a link to SurveyMonkey. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you very much. And that Emily will bring us to the lobby, kind of explain more about the networking. Thanks, everyone.
So yeah, thanks everyone. You can see my cat in the back. Just ignore him. He might go a little bit crazy, but that's the joy of having virtual meetings. So thank you everyone for Kyle and his cat in the corner there too. Yeah. They always make things interesting, don't they?
They do.
Yeah, so thank you so much guys for a really awesome day. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. So now, like Vicky mentioned, this is going to be open networking time. The event will be open until 4:30. We do encourage you to stick around and talk to people that you might not have had the chance to see at the beginning of the event. Remo floor plan is interactive, so you can jump around to the different tables simply by double clicking. So we encourage you just again to do that. If you are looking for someone in particular, you can go into the chat feature participants tab, search for whatever you're looking for, and you'll be able to sort of figure out where they are on the floor. I'll be around in the background if anyone has any questions, but with that, I'm going to send us back to the floor and say thank you again to all our great speakers.